The Granger movement was created by Oliver Hudson Kelley. It was divided into local units called the Granges. Farmers were drawn into the movement by the need for unified action against monopolistic railroads and grain elevators that charged exorbitant rates for handling and transporting agricultural products. In 1871, Illinois farmers who supported the Granger movement were able to get their state legislators to pass a bill fixing maximum rates that the railroad and grain facilities could charge. Other states followed suit, and eventually they were taken up to the Supreme Court in what was known as the Granger cases. The most significant of the Granger cases was Munn v. Illinois. A Chicago grain storage facility challenged the constitutionality of the 1871 Illinois laws setting maximum rates, but the court upheld legislation. This resulted in many rallies and protests from the workers being unhappy about the way they were being treated. One of the most famous rallies was the Great Strike of 1877. The Great Strike of 1877 was caused by the cutting of the wages for the third time in that year by the Baltimore and Ohio railroads. Strike workers would not allow any of the trains to roll until this third wage cut was revoked. This was the country's first major railroad strike and briefly immobilized the country's commerce. After the Great Strike of 1877, there were mass arrests and rallies such as the Haymarket Affair. On May 4, 1886, a simple labor rally turned into a riot with the introduction of a bomb. This resulted into the death of 4 police officers and the conviction of 8 protesters. This was a major setback for those trying to gain more organized labor rights. These rallies were the cause of laborers being forced to sign contracts assuring that they wouldn't join a labor union. The government came up with yellow dog contracts, scabs, and blacklisting to fight off labor unions. Yellow dog contracts were an agreement between an employee and an employer that the employee must not join a union while working for the employer. The Edmund Act of 1898 was constructed to stop the tactic, but was stopped by the freedom of contract. Scabs were used by the union to describe a person who would accept lower wages than what the union wanted. This was used to instill fear and self-loathing to guilt a person into joining a union. Blacklisting was used to show discrimination against a certain person or group and was used by labor unions to identify who didn't support their cause. Blacklisting also violated federal laws within an unfair labor practice. This started to create a gap between industrialists and workers that would keep widening until something changed.
By 1886, the movement for a federal regulatory law had become a strong force. Farm groups, merchants, and some of the railroad managers put their collective energy into the effort. But it wasn't until the Wabash case in 1886 did the gathering forces for regulation carry a bill through Congress. The final product of this was the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887. The Interstate Commerce Act of 1887 was made law with the support of both major political parties. The law only applied to railroads. The main provisions consisted of the following:
mandating reasonable rate charges, prohibited discrimination of special rates for individual shippers, prohibited unjustified preference in rates for any particular localities, shippers, or products, forbid long/haul discrimination, prohibited pooling of traffic or markets, and established a 5-member Interstate Commerce Commission.
Another act resulting from the movement was the Sherman Antitrust Act. This authorized the government to institute proceedings against trusts in order to dissolve them, but Supreme Court rulings prevented federal authorities from using the act for some years. This was the first federal law that outlawed monopolistic business practices. Although these acts regulated businesses, they didn't represent the workers. In the late 1800s, Andrew Carnegie was one of the leading steel producers. He allowed strong labor unions and affirmed workers' rights to organize. But an increase in new machinery allowed him to replace many skilled workers. This marked the end of collective bargaining between employers and employees, since the machinery could replace human labor at a cheaper price. This widening gap between employers and employees caused many groups that advocated for workers' rights to lose power and credibility. An example of this was the Knights of Labor. It was formed in 1869 as a secret society of workers. Led by Terence Powderly, one of the organization's main beliefs that ordinary people should gain control of their prospective enterprises they worked in. Their idea of a cooperative commonwealth consisted of the idea that employees would own the stores they worked in. To keep up with this broad plan, they made sure to include all races, genders, and types of employment. Another example of a workers' union created from the mistreatment of laborers is the American Federation of Labor. Founded in 1886 by Samuel Gompers, they were seen as a conservative group that held pessimistic views over politics, which caused them to support individuals instead of political parties. International Ladies Garment Workers Union was another example. They were formed in 1900 and primarily consisted of Jewish immigrants that represented the women in the clothing industry. Their New York City rallies in 1909 and 1910 helped gain protocol of peace between the clothing industry and its workers. This resulted in improved conditions, increased wages, and lessened working hours.
The American Railway Union was founded in the 1890s by Eugene V. Debs. They are most well known for their boycott on the luxury Pullman sleeping cars in 1894. This was done to support the strike of the workers employed at the Pullman Company. The strike against the Pullman Company, known as the Pullman Strike, was caused by the unfair way the company's owner, George Pullman, was treating his employees. He built a Pullman city and required all of his workers to live there, but they had to pay to use the library and church. Also, the equipment was not safe and resulted in deaths and injuries of the workers who were operating the machinery. On May 11, 1894, 3,000 Pullman workers went on a wildcat strike. Then, on June 26, 1894, American Railway Union workers refused to allow any train with a Pullman car to move. The boycott caused U.S. mail to be obstructed, and the leaders of the strike were forced to go in jail. The Industrial Workers of the World was one of the later unions to be established. It was created in Chicago in 1905 by William D. Haywood. They were comprised of mainly unskilled workers because they wanted to include all people of the working class. Their goal was to throw away wages and introduce putting workers in control of work through organized groups. To achieve these goals, they used class welfare that included boycotts, strikes, and slowdowns. In their mind of their creator, they were socialists with working clothes on. In conclusion, the formation of the organized labor unions, strikes, and rallies changed the outlook of workers' rights in America.